My dear students, I am explaining the lesson Memoirs of the CHOTA SAHIB. The lesson is written by ROWNTREE. You have already known it. So here, in the previous class, I mentioned the importance of Guwahati. So Guwahati was very important, had been very important since the past time, okay, when India was under the rule of British. Now I say the Kamrup district, of which Guwahati was the headquarters, extended to both banks of the river. Okay. Now all of us know about Kamrup district. Okay. During that time, Kamrup district included Guwahati, Sonapur, Nalbari, Borpeta, okay, Baksha. All these districts, new districts, were included in Kamrup district. So Kamrup district was a very vast one. Okay. That is why the writer John ROWNTREE says that Kamrup district extended on the both sides or both banks of the Brahmaputra. Okay, not only on the south side or south bank, but it also extended on the north bank also. But the land on the north bank of Kamrup district, but the land of Kamrup district on the north bank of the Brahmaputra was an edgeless land. That means it was a vast area. Here, that is why the writer says that the north bank had a character all its own, a vast remote states of flat edgeless land between the sandbanks of the Brahmaputra and the Himalayan foothills. So it was a very vast area which extended to the Himalaya, okay, mighty Himalaya. So all of us know that the land area of Kamrup district on the north bank of the Brahmaputra was a vast one. It extended up to the Himalayas. Okay, and this was the land where Manas Sanctuary was situated. Still now it is situated here. The writer says that it was a strange place. Okay, it was a strange place where the rivers dried up in hot weather or suddenly disappeared underground. And it was a strange place where the river dried up during the hot weather or suddenly the water went underground. Okay, so there was shortage of water. There was shortage of water on the north bank of the Brahmaputra, and during that time people depended on well for water, and they dug well or big well for water, and that was what it will be that they dug the land and got water from the land well. Okay, but sometimes it became very difficult to get water, and the water was very dirty. The water was very dirty. That is why the writer says that sometimes in camp we had to dig for water. There was shortage of water, and that is why in camp sometimes they had to dig for water. Okay, into the bucket again, which was so dirty that it had to be cleaned by dropping alum into the bucket to precipitate the mud. There were numerous bills replete with oil foal. Peepholes started through the grass, and in the Manas Sanctuary bordering the Himalayas state of Bhutan were a few rhino, and the rivers were full of peephole. Okay, again wildfowl. That means there were beals also. There were beals also, and there was the Manas Sanctuary, and Manas Sanctuary had a few rhinos also. The rivers were full of mahasir. Mahasir means fish. Okay, fish. Their rivers were full of mahasir. That means river had plenty of fishes. Okay, and their banks a favorite site for the governor's Christmas camps, which it was my task to build, and for which I sometimes received a polite letter of thanks from the great man. And on the banks of the river, the governor ordered this officer to build camps for the Christmas occasion. That means Christmas was celebrated on the bank of the river on the north bank of the Brahmaputra. Okay, and to build the The writer built the camps, and for that the governor sent him a letter of thanks or gratefulness because he had made all the preparation or arrangements for the Christmas celebration. Okay, this was the home of the Assam Sital, and it was here that I once witnessed the delightful sight of a sloth bear carrying her cuddlesome cub on her back. Right in the middle of the world, a European and his wife had leased a piece of land from the forest department with a view to growing simul trees for the nearby match factory. And what was the home? That means the north bank of the Brahmaputra, which extended to the Himalayas, was the home of Assam Sital. Okay, Sital means kind of deer or animals of deer species. So there were so many deer, and once the writer saw a delightful scene that a bear carried her cuddlesome cub on her back, and this was a very funny scene. Words by the writer John ROWNTREE. So he says, and again, right in the middle of the forest, a European and his wife, that means a couple, a European couple had leased a plot of land, and they planted their simul trees, and they grew their simul trees in order for the nearby match factory. Okay, for the protection of that simul trees, they fenced all around, and there was electricity. But what happened? Interestingly, you will be very astonished or surprised to know that the protection wall or the fencing did not yield any fruit because the deer jumped over the fence and had done their work. Okay, and there was not any report or information or any incident that deer was electrocuted. Okay, but the writer, who did not know about the electrocution or electricity fencing, he had got the full treatment once. That means he got the electric shock. Okay, that is why the writer says writer says that the European couple did not get any profit from the plantation or simul plantation, or did not get any profit because the plantation was destroyed by the deer. So he says that they had rigged up miles of electric fencing in an attempt to keep out the deer, but with little success as far as the deer were concerned. They just jump over it. On the other hand, never having met an electric fence before, I received the full treatment. So I have already explained this. The writer had got the full treatment because he had never experienced any electric fencing in the jungle or the forest. For the first time, he got it, and so far as it was not within his knowledge, that is why he got the full treatment. But he never saw a deer got electrocuted, okay, in the electricity fencing. So I am afraid their enterprise was in no sense a very profitable one. So the writer says that they got no profit from their simul plantation. Now the writer says, during the cold weather, the north bank was delightful. So during the cold weather, the north bank was delightful. Why? During this period, in the rainy season, it was a hotbed of malaria and was best avoided. But in the rainy season, the north bank was a hotbed of malaria, and that is why the writer says that it was best to avoid this place during the rainy season. Otherwise, they would be affected with malaria. Now see, travel at this time of year could also pose problems. Again, as it was the rainy season, so it was very difficult to travel in that area on the north bank of the Brahmaputra. Why? The rivers were in flood, and the bamboo bridges erected at the start of the cold weather were soon washed away. So the rivers were flooded, and the bamboo bridge which was erected at the start of the flood was when the bamboo bridges were washed away by the flood water. So what? It was very difficult to travel during the rainy season on the north bank of the Brahmaputra. Now the writer says these bridges swayed and creaked alarmingly under a passing car, but were immensely strong and extremely useful. Though the bridges swayed and creaked alarmingly, but they were very strong. They were very strong. But during the flood, the bridges were washed away. But sometimes, but before that, the bridges were so strong that people could drive cars on them. Once I forded one of these flooded rivers on horseback. With difficulty I persuaded my mount to plunge into the water, and then slipped over his crop and hung to his tail, which I was able to use as a rudder. So it was a very adventure for the writer, because once he had crossed a flooded river on his horseback. So we know that British people were very brave, and for their bravery they could travel all over the world. And once they had a very shining period that the sun of the British never set all over the world, because they were very brave. And so you see here, being an officer, forest officer, he crossed the flooded river on a horseback. What was a dreadful action or dreadful activity did or work done by the forest officer. Okay, so whatever they wanted to do, they could do it. Okay, that is why as it was his need to cross the river, he did it, not by boat or not by swimming. And it was impossible to swim across the river. That is why he managed to plunge his horse into the water, and on his back he crossed the river, and he used the tail of the horse as a rudder, and that is why he could. And finally he landed on the other bank of the river safely. Okay, so it was a very brave work done by this John ROWNTREE. So what did he say about that? With difficulty I persuaded my mount to plunge into the water, then slipped over his croup and hung on to his tail, which I was able to use as a rudder. When I pushed it to the right, the horse veered to the left, and vice versa, and we eventually made a safe landing on the other side of the river. More usually crossings were made in a marboat, a tedious performance at the best of times. Okay, at that time, more usually the crossing of river was made by a marboat. Now what is a marboat? A marboat is a big boat where it is a planked boat where two boats were put alongside, and crossing of the river was done with the help of the marboat. Cars were also made to pass the river with the help of the marboat. That is why the writer says these were either paddle. That means how was the marboat operated? How was the marboat operated? For this answer, the writer says the mark, which was a ferry, consisted of a plank platform covering two open boats placed alongside one another. These were either paddled across the river or connected by running cable to another straits across the river, were propelled from one side to the other by the force of the current. So the marboat was operated with the help of marboat was operated by paddling across the river or by connecting a cable. People used to cross the river with the help of marboat. Okay, these ingenious device worked very well, but constant adjustments had to be made to allow for the rise and fall of the rivers. A whole series of ghats or landing places had to be constructed at different levels on the river bank. fortunately traffic was light, and although crossing took time, there were few delays. Okay. As they used the marboat, they had to maintain the ghats. Okay, because the marboat reached the other bank of the river, and then with the water level becoming high or low, they had to adjust the ghats for the marboat. Okay, it was done by them frequently, but it was fortunate that time traffic was light. That is why it took a little time, or it did not take much time to cross across the river with the help of marboat. The other difficulty about travel anywhere in Assam during the rains was the fact that the dirt tracks soon became unusable by normal cars, and the jeep had yet to be invented. And there was another problem to travel during this season, rainy season, on the north bank of the Brahmaputra, because the track on which car was run, what happened? The dirt tracks soon became unusable. That means the tracks became soon unusable for the cars, and the cars were not so strong at that time, because jeeps were not invented till then. Why has the writer mentioned about jeep here? Because jeep is a strong car, and it could go easily even on bad roads also. That is why the writer says during that period, till then jeeps were not invented, and if there were jeeps, then they could travel easily on that dark tracks also. That is why once when touring with my family on the north bank, we left our return rather late. Or rather the monsoon broke rather early, and although the roads were still motorable, driving becomes distinctly dicey. So once when the writer was traveling with his family on the north bank, what happened? The monsoon broke rather early, and that is why what happened? The driving on the road became very dicey, slippery. Most of the main roads were built on top of embankments to raise them well above the normal flood level, and most of the roads were made on the embankment. What do you mean by embankment? Tall or high roads that were built on the banks of the river. So most of the roads were built on the embankments. And what happened? And it was raised well above the normal flood level. So normal flood level could not affect the embankments. And they were narrow single track affairs. Again, the roads were not wide, they were very narrow, and one time only one car could pass. The road we were on became increasingly greasy, one skid to another, and finally we slithered over the edge into a paddy field some 6 feet below the road. An accident took place, and the road was very slippery. That is why they fell down the embankment, and they that means they fell on the paddy field, which was 6 feet below the road. They fell on a paddy field which was 6 feet below the road. Paddy fields are divided into small enclosures by low banks in order to prevent the flood water running away, and we had one of the most bumpy rides of my experience before finding a way back onto the road. Again, the paddy fields, which are actually divided into small portions to keep the water. That is why that was a bumpy. That means that was a bumpy rides, and they could return come up to the road with very difficulty. At the start of our travels, before the rains broke, the roads had been so dry that the surface was almost invisible under a cloud of dust. Again, when they started their travel, the weather was very dry, and that is why the road became invisible due to sand, okay, or cloud, under cloud of dust. Because of dust, they could not see the road very well. Driving was difficult, and one's destination was uncertain. So, in that condition, driving was very difficult, and their destination was uncertain. That means they may go out, they might go out from the home, but it was not certain that they could get the destination or come back home safe. So it was very difficult. It was a very difficult travel during that time on the north bank of the Brahmaputra. At one place, road work had been in progress, and one of the favorite hazards of road workers, a ramp lay concealed from sight under the dust cloud, and there was a road work in progress, and it was here the sight of the dust cloud concealed the road ramp. There was a ramp, and it was concealed. It was concealed from the sight under the dust cloud, and there was not any. There were not any signs used here, and that is why the writer could not ascertain the road or could not realize the road well, could not understand the road well. That is why what happened, and nor was this one of the puny ramps usually encountered in civilized countries, but a step about 6 inches high. Needless to say, the impact when we hit it was inconsiderable. That means when they hit the ramp, then an accident took place. So we have already got about 2 incidents of accidents. Once they fell 6 feet below the road, okay, they fell on the paddy field. Now they faced an accident where what happened then? The car was carrying, okay, as the car was carrying my wife, myself, the baby, and her ayah, our servants, and the usual mass of camp equipment. It says much for the motor engineers of those days that not a single spring was broken on either of these occasions. Probably the fact that we are packed like sardines in the car saved our bones. What happened? The writer and his family were lucky enough that they did not get injury. It is because the car was packed with passengers. It was his wife, his children, his servants and ayahs, all were there. Okay, they were very packed inside the car, and that is why nobody's bones were broken. And it is very important to note that not a single spring of the car also broke. Okay, that is why although they faced these 2 accidents, they did not get any injury or they were not hurt. So they are fortunate. They were very fortunate enough. They were fortunate enough that though they faced accidents, they did not get themselves hurt. Okay. Now what the writer says, this already he has explained so many things about the north bank of the Brahmaputra. Now he will describe the characteristic of the south bank of the Brahmaputra. Now I am reading, the south bank was more homely. So he has said that during the flood or during the rainy season, it was very difficult to live a happy life on the north bank of the Brahmaputra, because during the rainy season it became a hotbed of malaria, and travel on the bank of the Brahmaputra was very difficult during this rainy season, okay, or during the flood. Now the writer says the south bank of the Brahmaputra was more homely than the north bank of the Brahmaputra. That is why he built his house or his home on the south bank of the Brahmaputra, that is in Guwahati. We have already known at the very beginning of the lesson. Now you see, the south bank was more homely, distances were less, and the terrain smaller, and the south bank's land was smaller than that of the north bank. We have already known that the land on the north bank was very vast. It was an ageless land, the writer has said. But the terrain on the south bank was smaller and distances were less. That is why the reserve forests were mostly in one block, and the reserve forests were mostly in one block. There were no rivers. Okay, there were no rivers there on the south bank of the Brahmaputra. There were forests only, and the forests were mostly in one block. But the north bank was a vast area having rivers, forests, jungles, animals, birds, seeds, fishes, cheetal, everything was there. Okay, and even in the Manas sanctuary, there were rhinos also. There were rhinos also in the Manas sanctuary, and one could have the splendid view up to the Himalayas when they looked on the north bank of the Brahmaputra. Now the south bank was more homely than that of the north bank of the Brahmaputra, and it was a country of low hills and valleys. The trees interspersed with villages and cultivation. So there were trees, and it was a low hill, and it was a place of low hills and valleys, and the trees were interspersed with cultivation. Okay, interspersed with villages and cultivation. People cultivated there, and the forest itself mostly of sal, and there were forests of sals. Okay, most of the forest had produced sal tree or sal wood. Okay, had more the character of English woodland, and the sal of this south bank had the characteristic of English woodland. Again, two comfortable forest bungalows served our needs. One at Kulsi was delightfully situated on a wooded spur above the river. The other at Rajapara in a clearing would have been equally charming if it had not been for the bats which lived in the roof. The writer used to live in two forest bungalows on the south bank of the Brahmaputra. One was at Kulsi, and it was on the spur. On a wooded spur above the river, and another residence was at Rajapara. Okay, the writer says the Rajapara would have been equally comfortable for him if there were no bats, because at night huge bats used to sit on the roofs, and they had bad smell with there was bad smell with the bats, and that is why it was very difficult, or it was very uncomfortable for the writer to reside in the bungalow of Rajapara. But they felt very comfort in the residence or in the bungalow of Kulsi. The writer says their droppings were a most constant reminder of their presence, and the fusty smell of bat was ever with us. Larger but less smelly were the huge fruit-eating bats with a wingspan of 5 feet, which lived in a tree outside the bungalow and issued forth at dusk in search of food. A strange host of ghostly shapes gliding through the air on silent wings. So all of us know that bats do not come out during the daytime. They come out only at night. And the writer says that the bats which came out at night looked like a ghost, because they had wings. They had wings which were 5 feet long. So very large bats, and they gave bad smell, and that is why the writer says that he did not feel comfort living at the residence or bungalow of Rajapara. Again, he says, what happened? Close to the bungalow was a large bill where an earthquake had once lowered the surface, and the land became inundated with water. It was an eerie spot where the tree skeletons still rose out of the water, a reminder that it had once been dry land. And close to the bungalow of Rajapara, the writer says there was a bill. About the bill, the writer says that it was actually not a bill. It was once a surface or dry land, and the earthquake had made it bill. Okay, and there could be seen the skeletons of trees, and this reminded us that this place had once been a dry place, and it was not a bill. It was a dry place at once, because the tree skeletons bore the witness that it was a dry land. So about this bill, sometimes a question is asked, write 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 about the bill that was close to the bungalow of Rajapara. Okay. In spite of its somewhat macabre association, however, Rajapara was a pleasant place to work in, and the paddy fields where the jungle fowl gleaned the grain after harvest and sometimes found their way into the pot were cheerful, sunny and open spaces. Though there was a macabre association, Rajapara was a very good place to work in because there were paddy fields. There were paddy fields and the place was very nice. Okay, and the space was white, and there was the weather was sunny and very cheerful. Okay, it was they found very comfort in working at Rajapara, and the situation of the atmosphere was good except that of the bats. But the writer says what? But Kulsi was my favorite. Though Rajapara was comfortable for work or to work in, yet in spite of that, the poet's favorite bungalow was Kulsi. Okay, Kulsi was his favorite. The bungalow was surrounded by teak plantations because the bungalow was surrounded by teak plantations. Okay, planted some 60 years before and now almost mature. In fact, growth in the Assam climate was too rapid to produce first-class teak and the local variety, though useful furniture wood was never up to Burma standards. Okay, it was surrounded by teak plantations, and the teak produced in this area was not up to Burma standards. Close by was a rubber plantation, and close by the bungalow of Kulsi, there was a rubber plantation of Ficus elastica, but no tapping had taken place for some years. But there, no tapping had taken place for many years there, since Indian rubber has no longer able to compete with para rubber commercially, because Indian rubber could not compete with para rubber commercially. That is why the writer says Indian rubber was no longer able to compete with para rubber commercially. Ficus elastica belongs to the fig family, of which several species are found in Assam. Some grow to an immense size, having started life as climbing epiphytes on other trees. So Ficus elastica belongs to the fig family. And what happens? So several species are found in Assam. Some grow on an immense size, having started life as climbing epiphytes on other trees. So what are epiphytes? Epiphytes are trees that grow on other trees and encase the tree. Okay, they feed on the other trees. Eventually the host tree becomes completely encased by the ficus, which forms a smooth bark around it. The host dies and the epiphyte takes over. Okay, the tree which they epiphytes encased actually meets the trees meet their death, and the epiphytes take over them. Now some, like the banyan, send down aerial roots from their branches which help to buttress the huge bulk of the tree. So my dear students, I have explained the whole lesson, Memoirs of a CHOTA Sahib, written by ROWNTREE. I hope you have understood, and if there is any difficulty or problem in understanding this lesson, so you may ask me your question or you may pass your comment. So I will always give response to answer all your questions. So thank you for listening. Study well at home. Thank you.